All
All right.
right, welcome. Hi, everybody. We are live. We're actually live on LinkedIn today. We are live on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you're joining today, please say hi, say where you're tuning in from. Let us know if you're having any issues with the sound or seeing us, anything like that. And it does, I'm just checking, and it does look like over on YouTube, the closed captions are not working right now. So once I am done with the introduction, I'll jump over there and check out closed captions on YouTube. But again, we are also live on Quickly Hire LinkedIn and also Facebook. So I'll do my introduction and I'll go do some troubleshooting over there so we can make sure we have everything working correctly. So welcome to the Agency Hour presented by Quickly Hire. The Agency Hour is a space for agency owners to come and learn from experts in their field. These webinars and discussions are designed to help you boost your revenue, sharpen your skills, and fuel growth in your business. So today, we are joined by accessibility expert Chris Hinds, who is the COO of Equalize Digital. Hey, Chris.
Hi.
And
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Chris will be discussing, I should say, accessibility testing and how to use it as a driver for growth in your agency. This is part one of a three-part series we're doing with Chris on the topic of growing your agency revenue with accessibility. So make sure to subscribe and follow our channel so that you can be alerted for part two and part three, and we'll be sending out notifications on that. Those are coming up in the coming weeks. So yeah, we hope you can come to all of them and learn a lot and apply what you learn here. So first, though, I really want to talk just quickly about Quickly Hire. Quickly Hire is the fastest way to add vetted freelancers to your team. At Quickly Hire, we understand the importance of assembling top-tier talent for your business. Whether you need a developer, a content marketer, designer, virtual assistant, we are adding SEO specialists and paid ad specialists in there right now. We've got some great talent that we've just added to the network for those positions as well. We've got you covered. So our platform connects you with highly vetted freelancers who match your budget and requirements, ensuring you find the perfect fit for your team. Our freelancers work with you for a set number of hours weekly on a retainer basis, and you pay that set monthly retainer. That's all. We take care of all the sourcing, the vetting, the interviews, the compliance, the payroll, international fund transfers, all of those administrative headaches that go along with hiring. And you can just reach out to us at quicklyhire.com to learn more about that. And we'd love to help you. So that is Quickly Hire. Let's get back to the reason we're here today, which is Chris Hinds. So Chris is a business manager with over 15 years of experience coordinating and executing complex, high-budget efforts in various industries. He has been involved in WordPress and accessibility-related projects since 2015, primarily from a business development and project management perspective. Equalize Digital has been involved in accessibility projects for a wide range of organizations, everything from small businesses all the way to NASA. Chris has personally sold multiple millions of dollars in digital products and services, including more than $500,000 in accessibility offerings in 2023 alone. His objective is to teach more agencies and freelancers how to sell their customers on accessibility, which benefits everyone. We're so excited to have you here, Chris. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge with our audience. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you, Quickly Hire, for hosting me for this. I really am excited to dive into accessibility as a service and trying to teach more agencies how to do this important work and how to sell their existing customers on it and how to attract new customers going forward. We're going to talk about it a lot today. And I am, I'm just excited to dive in. And I think what I really want to start with is why I'm doing this, right? I think that's important for context. So Emily, you did a better job introducing me than I probably could have myself. So shout out to you for that. great work. I appreciate it. But in terms of why I'm personally doing this, I really do want it to be my personal mission this year to help more agencies and freelancers position and sell accessibility effectively. And the reason for that is, and we're going to get into some statistics on this in this presentation, but just to be completely frank, the accessibility specialists that are out there doing this work, we need help. Many of us are completely overwhelmed. There's more work in the accessibility space than there are people to fulfill it. And that's not hyperbole. I'm not making that up. So this is a 3-part series, as has been mentioned. This is part 1. Each part of this series is intended to build upon the next part so that by the end of it, you are basically ready to start positioning and selling an introductory or initial accessibility as a service offering to your customers. And you will really get the most out of this if you attend all 3 of these in succession. So what is part 1 about? Part 1, we're going to start with a very high level introduction into what accessibility is and what the current landscape is. I think that general context is very important to people who are maybe just getting into this. Next, we're going to talk about or define what we mean when we say accessibility as a service, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about why agencies and freelancers specifically are the ideal people to start helping out with this and to start offering this to their customers. We're going to do a rundown of the fundamental tools and tactics that accessibility professionals use in the space so that you have lots of things that you can look up, that you can go out and grab after the presentation and start to play around with if you're just getting into this. And finally, we are going to talk a little bit about what every professional should know about accessibility overlays or accessibility widgets, which you may have heard of, but if you haven't, I'm going to explain what they are. So let's begin, shall we? What is accessibility? What does that actually mean, right? Well, an accessible website is something that can be used by everyone. So let's talk about that because there's 3 key components to that, in my opinion. First, people of all abilities and disabilities, right? So when we think about individuals who maybe have a disability, the most common things that come to mind, particularly in the web space, are people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or maybe who are blind or have some sort of visual impairment. And so those people, they might be needing captions on videos, right? Which I think there's a message from Quickly Hire about that very thing in the chat right now. Or maybe they need audio transcription. Maybe they need alternative text for images. Perhaps they're using a keyboard or a screen reader to navigate through a website and to consume that content, right? Those are some of the ones that are most obvious or most apparent when a web professional is thinking about accessibility, but there are less obvious ones. So one of those that comes to mind immediately for me is color blindness. So if you're only denoting information or sharing information with a user in an interface using color alone, and those colors are red or green, someone who is colorblind may have trouble discerning that information, right? So, we often see like green good, red bad, but there's no icon or no text. That's just an example of something that's less obvious that people don't always consider. The other thing that isn't often considered is that disabilities can be temporary. So maybe you're right-handed and you use a mouse and you broke your right arm. Maybe you can't use a mouse or a trackpad effectively for several weeks or months, right? That's a temporary disability. Maybe you've just had a tough few days, and some of us can relate to this, right? We haven't gotten enough sleep. We're under a lot of stress. Maybe we're just not thinking clearly and we're having trouble absorbing complex information, or if the interface just isn't clear, we might just get confused and go about our business and move on, right? These are the types of things that we think about when we think about people of all abilities and all disabilities. But it doesn't stop there. We need to be accessible across a wide variety of devices and technologies. Of course, we've all heard about responsiveness, multiple platform support. So we need to support people, whether they're using Mac, PC, Android, different browsers. Maybe they're on a phone or a tablet and not a desktop computer. Maybe you're low vision and using a screen reader. Your computer is actually reading what's on the screen to you like it's a book, essentially, instead of you looking at it and absorbing the information with your eyes, right? And then finally, we have different access points. So what I mean by this is, are you accessing the internet via gigabit fiber, or are you in a less developed rural area and you're still on like a 3G connection, right? And the technologies that we engage with every day need to be available to us, and we need to avail ourselves of them regardless of these different aspects. They need to be accessible to us. We need to be able to use them. So, having defined accessibility, it's not hard to imagine that this actually impacts a lot of people. It's not even really a minority of the population by, a metric that most of us would think of, like 1 or 2%. It's actually more than a billion people in the world have some form of disability. It's about 15% of the world's population. And that's according to a 2018 World Health Organization report on disability. So, not numbers I'm making up, right? Approximately 1 in 4 US adults have a disability, according to a 2018 report from the CDC. And those individuals, according to the US Department of Labor, have annual discretionary spending capacity of about $200 billion. That's per year. So, again, this is not a small group of people. It's not something that is a minority of the population or something that we should dismiss or not care about, right? It impacts very large swaths of our population. And to be frank, a lot of us are aging into needing accessibility features, right? So by the time I've already got the gray hairs, you can see, but by the time I'm an old man, I want to make sure that the internet that I get to use is way more accessible than it is today. So, how do we measure accessibility, right? Well, there's laws and then there are standards. So, I want to talk again about this very broadly. So, there are a lot of laws, both US and abroad, and laws are passed by national, state, and municipal governments. Some examples of that might be the Americans with Disabilities Act here in the US, or also in the US, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, particularly in that Section 504 or Section 508. In California, so state level, you have the Unruh Civil Rights Act, UCRA. In Canada and Ontario, you have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And there's many, many more in countries, municipalities, states, just across the globe. All of these laws, or many of them, can be ambiguous. So, just really broad in terms of what they require for accessibility. They might just say everybody needs equal access and leave it up to the interpretation of lawyers and courts and whoever else for what that actually means. Other laws are very clear. So, they might reference specific standards to follow, which brings us to standards. The primary international standard, which most of us have heard of, are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. These are put out by the World Wide Web Consortium, which is an international organization that develops all sorts of standards that govern the web and how it's built. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are the most commonly referenced standard across the globe, both by accessibility professionals and in some, but not all, laws. So that is just a bit of a delineation between laws and standards. Recapping a bit, laws can and are enforced by governments and sometimes lawyers and judges, and they are dependent on geography or where you do business. Standards are how we actually measure and prove accessibility definitively, and they don't respect borders, right? They're just a standard that anyone can adopt and follow. 96.3% of websites have easily detectable accessibility issues directly on their homepage. Again, this isn't a stat I just made up. This stat is from the Web A Million 2023 report. So this was last year. They scanned the top 1 million homepages globally across the entire internet, and they use automated scans. And what they are finding is that 96.3% of homepages of the top 1 million websites have easily detectable and preventable issues. The reason I say easily detectable and preventable issues is because they can be detected with an automated scan. They don't even require a human tester to identify. When you look at a stat like that, some things become clear very quickly. First, as I alluded to in my introduction, there are not enough people doing accessibility to address an issue like this. Number two, there is a really obvious group of people who are positioned to be part of a solution. And those people, yeah, they can make money solving this problem. And that's what I want to talk about across this webinar series, right? So we understand the landscape, we understand the problem, we understand how pervasive it is, right? But why agencies and freelancers specifically and not just specialized accessibility people? Well, here are my thoughts. First of all, you're already there. You're already doing other work in the systems where accessibility can be controlled. Number two, your customers trust you to make good recommendations and good decisions on their behalf. And having an accessible website certainly should be one of those. And there is an economic incentive for both parties. You make money and they get a clear, measurable benefit, which is a more accessible website. And we'll go into some of those benefits here in a second and how this is actually measurable. But for now, a lot of web professionals, they're not really trying to solve this yet. In fact, I would argue the vast majority aren't, or they're ignoring it, or they're putting things in their terms saying that they just don't do accessibility. And if you want it, you have to reach out to something else, or to someone else, I should say. And I think that sort of approach is a mistake. I think this is a huge opportunity to make the internet better and for agencies and freelancers to make money. It has a broad impact on your customer, real world impact. First of all, there's risk mitigation. So we'll talk about some stats, but the risk mitigation component is there are a lot of accessibility lawsuits happening. There are a lot of accessibility laws globally, including here in the US and in Canada and in the EU, where you can be legally liable for not having an accessible website. And people can either sue you or they can file complaints with state authorities and get you fined or worse. It also has a tangible benefit, so more on the carrot side and less on the stick side, right? A tangible benefit for SEO. If you can imagine having a website that is inherently more usable, that has a better user experience and user interface, that is more clear to people, that people can engage with no matter what sort of device or input medium they are using, right? Screen reader, mouse, keyboard, whatever, right? Laptop, phone, tablet, you are going to have dramatically lower or significantly lower bounce rates. People are going to spend more time on the site engaging with content because they are statistically more likely to be able to use it in the way that they prefer on the device that they prefer. And when Google sees that this sort of uptick in engagement, what happens to your rank, right? And then more sales. So customers that are concerned about conversion optimization or anything else, what I always say is imagine putting up essentially like an obstacle course in front of the front door of your bricks and mortar business that only 85% of your customers can potentially get through. What business owner in their right mind would make that decision? Right? So this is what we mean by more sales, more conversion optimization. You are actively increasing the throughput of traffic and potential sales. And finally, it's just the right thing to do. You're teaming up with your customers to help make their web presence and the overall internet better for everyone. And gosh, wouldn't that feel great, right? So I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about what I call the accessibility train. So the accessibility train is coming. What do I mean by that? Well, there are major accessibility laws and regulations already on the books or proposed coming down the pipeline in the United States and abroad. Most organizations, for instance, doing business in or located in the European Union will be required to have accessible websites by next summer of 2025. There is a deadline coming. This is a law that's already on the books in the EU. Here in the United States, at least one state that I know of is proposing a law that would allow web developers to be pulled into accessibility lawsuits and sued. And last year, there were over 4,000 lawsuits filed against organizations that had inaccessible websites, which is about 11 lawsuits per day. And I think the most interesting thing about that statistic, right, is that's lawsuits filed. So that is the result of legal complaints that went unaddressed to the point that an attorney actually went to file a lawsuit. So we can imagine how much larger the number of letters or complaints that were sent out by people's attorneys about accessibility issues on websites. This is just what we can document in terms of the number of lawsuits filed. So I'm sure a factor of many times that number were the number of complaints that went out to businesses. And in my own sales conversations and in conversations with multiple agencies, we're really starting to see, or hear about an increase in even small business owners starting to ask about accessibility, right? Maybe they had friends who got a letter, or maybe they got a letter themselves, or they read an article about a high profile lawsuit, and they're starting to list this as a project requirement. um, and so this is what the accessibility train is. And the reason I call it this is it's actually, I credit an agency owner I spoke with back in 2022, so almost 2 years ago. And I'm just going to quote them directly. They said, the accessibility train is coming, and we're all either going to get on it or we're going to get run over by it. So let's talk about how to fix this problem together and help our customers while generating more revenue for ourselves. I'm coining this accessibility as a service, and I want to introduce folks to the definition of this. And this will probably be the one time I directly read a slide, but I just want to read this out. So, defining accessibility as service, a solution delivery model whereby customers can receive accessibility services and or accessibility tools they need to make their digital content more accessible, typically as part of an ongoing subscription. So I want to just provide a handful of examples of different implementations of accessibility as a service that we've seen among agencies who are starting to catch on to this, and what some that we've done ourselves. So first, one is maybe offering a quarterly accessibility status report on a customer's homepage, header and footer, right? Where we're going in, we're doing some sort of automated scan, maybe a little bit of manual testing for some fundamental accessibility issues. We're compiling that into some sort of report or deliverable to give them. And maybe we're establishing some trend lines or using that as a sales tool, right, to sell future services. Or maybe it's adding automated accessibility scanning to maintenance plans. There are a number of different products out there that offer automated accessibility scans, some of which I will talk about in today's presentation. And this is a very cost effective, at times, way to start to introduce this and introduce your customers to the concept of accessibility, particularly those on maintenance plans. And I think that there's a way to position this where you aren't embarrassed or having them feel like they were thrown for a loop, right? Just introduce it as, hey, this is a new best practice we're adopting, and we are starting to report on this so that you are aware of the situation and we can guide you to a better place in terms of accessibility. Because an ignored problem doesn't get solved, right? Ongoing accessibility monitoring plans. So this is something that we do where essentially after we have delivered a website or made a website accessible through audits and remediation, we will put them on a monitoring plan, which is a permanent ongoing service where we are going back and checking maybe quarterly, maybe annually, depending on the customer's regulatory environment and how often their website changes. And we're going in and we're just confirming that everything still looks good. So we're doing some spot checks. Maybe we're running some automated scans. We're delivering them a report. And if we find a sufficient number of issues that are, not, I guess, surface level or minor, we might say, hey, we might need to do a deeper level of service here to try to figure out what's going on and why your accessibility has regressed, right? And then at the deepest level, there's accessibility remediation or consulting retainers, where you have in-house or outsourced experts coming in, and the customers pay some sort of monthly fee for a rolling consulting retainer or engagement where they are specifically trying to become more accessible over time. And this can take numerous forms. It can be just direct development. So maybe they already have an audit and you're just fixing issues that have already been identified. Or maybe you're doing some consulting with them around setting policies and practices to create more accessible outcomes for new content or new things that they're adding to their websites in the future. So my point in sharing some of these examples and going into them a little bit is just to show that there's a lot of different approaches that agencies can take depending on how they are specialized and what staff they have. There are a lot of different offers, and I think any offer that meaningfully advances accessibility for a customer is going to ultimately serve you and also serve your customer well, for the numerous reasons we've already gone into. The other core thing that I really want to drive home in this initial introduction is that accessibility is not one and done. So there's a common saying in the accessibility space, which I've oft repeated on many a call and email, which is accessibility is a journey and not a destination. So unless your website is, I don't know, static HTML on a server that you maintain where nothing ever changes, and you build it once and you literally do not touch it at all, then there are things that can come up that change the website, right? So there are a lot of potential ways that a website can change, right? Unless that we go through that scenario of it being a completely static thing. This is particularly true in WordPress, right? Maybe we're changing or we're adding content. Maybe we're adjusting navigation menus because we added a new service or a new page or a new feature to our website. Maybe we made some strategic style changes to our theme or to our layouts, or we added a new, Gutenberg block kit to our website, right? Any of these, installing new plugins, even updating existing plugins. If the plugin update could introduce a breaking change for accessibility. This is why we have website maintenance and monitoring plans, right? Just in general terms, right? And traditionally in those plans, we've talked about security, performance, protecting brand image by making sure a website is stable, right? But what we have not really introduced to these that I think would be a good thing for the web as a whole is accessibility. Having some sort of accessibility monitoring or management component in a maintenance plan for a website is going to be essential based on all of the trend lines that I've already shared, the laws that are on the books and coming down the pipeline, and just generally what is happening in the industry, right? And I'm talking about these in broad strokes. We're going to go into a lot more detail on the state of the accessibility industry in session 2, but suffice to say, accessibility should be part of some sort of ongoing service offering to customers for freelancers and for web agencies. There are differing levels of service that can really be offered for this. So, depending on your comfort level and capacity, maybe you're only offering some very limited accessibility detection or fixes or things of that nature. These are typically going to be heavily reliant on automated testing tools, maybe because you don't have a lot of experience or in-house knowledge yet on testing with keyboards and screen readers and measuring everything exactly against web content accessibility guideline standards, right? The point is there are still accessibility offerings that someone who is relatively new to this can reliably offer. And then, yes, it does make a meaningful impact for you and for your customers to do so. And the reality is for any of us for developing any new skill is you always start right as a total beginner, right? I started as a total beginner in 2015. The only advantage I have over any of you is time, right? If you're brand new at this. But I guarantee you within 2 or 3 years, you will be able to speak to all of this stuff just as effectively as I can and be able to propose solutions just as effectively as our team can at Equalize Digital. So if you already have that experience, though, having more comprehensive offerings that include manual testing by experts or deep fixes to code, if you have those capabilities or you can bring in those capabilities, that is also a really great thing to do. And it all depends on your comfort level and your confidence with starting to roll stuff like this out. It also depends a little bit on who your audience is, right? Who your customers are already. So the type of service you offer will gauge what of these 3 approaches to accessibility as a service you might take. So the first one is in-house. So I'm generally defining that as something that is done 80 to 100% by your team. It generally will require a high degree of expertise if it's anything more than that limited accessibility detection solution I was talking about earlier. And because you may have to have dedicated team members to do an in-house offering, depending on volume, it generally requires a high volume to support unless you have someone cross-trained and most of their time is already occupied with another service area. But that's generally what in-house looks like. You have dedicated team members doing it, you're doing most of the work, and you generally need to be able to have a reasonably high volume of requests for this service coming in order to be able to support that. The hybrid model I'm defining as between 30 and 70% of it is done by your team. So in this instance, a moderate degree of expertise may be needed because you're starting to pull in maybe some outside experts to help with the more difficult parts, or maybe just the parts where there's a skill gap in your team that you just can't fill or can't justify bringing in like a full-time person. Um, and I would say this requires what I'm just going to refer to as steady volume to support. So you have occasional leads for this type of offer trickling in, or you think your list is sufficiently developed that you can reach out and sell this somewhat reliably at a semi-regular cadence, right? And then fully outsourced, I'm thinking, 0 to 20% of it is done by your team, probably mostly project management and exchanging information. It requires a very low degree of expertise, and little to no volume is needed to get started in terms of service inquiries. Or work on the books, right? So these are the three core approaches, and I think they'll be important as we consider, as freelancers and agencies, what our initial offer is, right? So we can think about what our offers might be, how we can start to roll accessibility offerings into what we're already doing, and then we can think about, okay, if I know that I want to offer X, Y, and Z, or maybe just X. I know that based on what I'm offering, I probably need to go with a hybrid model because, Sally, my developer, just lacks a little bit of experience in this one key area of accessibility, and this is really what I think my customers need, right? So that's just kind of the thought process that you have to go through. I want to talk a little bit about the fundamental tools and tactics of the accessibility trade. So these are the things that we use to determine accessibility and address it in projects of all sorts and all shapes and sizes, all sorts of different plan levels, and offerings that you can put together just with these tools. So this is really meant to be a high level overview of the tools and not a comprehensive training on each one of them. We would need weeks to fulfill that. But we do have a lot of training resources available that I can point to, as well as I am aware of a few different respected third-party resources for each one of these, for training on screen readers, training on keyboard testing. We have a checklist for shifting left with accessibility, which I'll go into. So there's a lot that I can share here. If you want to send me an email or reach out after the presentation, happy to do that. So first, I'd like to start with automated testing. So these are quick tests and they are not a comprehensive audit. So what these typically look like is they are um, browser extensions or software that can scrape or scan or run through a web page and basically output a list of issues that can be detected through automation. Some of them will be errors where the tool can definitively say, yes, this is a problem because it's very straightforward in the code. I can tell that this is a problem. Or it might be something like a warning where it's like, well, this could be a problem, so I'm going to flag it as something that a human needs to evaluate really quick and confirm whether this is a problem or not, right? Um, and it's important to note that with automated testing tools, they're only going to cover maybe 40% of all of web content accessibility guideline standards. So to cover 100%, manual testing is definitely needed. However, even if you can resolve everything identified in these tools up to that, roughly 40% mark, and you can get a clean report back, your website is fundamentally very accessible compared to a lot of its competitors, arguably, based on some stats I've shown earlier, right? When tools like these are the very same tools that were used to generate that Web A Million report, 96% of homepages have problems that can be detected by tools like these. If you can generate a tool, or excuse me, if you can generate a report that comes back clean because you fixed everything that an automated check can identify, what I mean, maybe my math is a little wrong here, but I think what that fundamentally means, from the purposes of automated testing, is that your website is going to be fundamentally more accessible or fundamentally have fewer issues than 95% of the websites on the internet if you can get a clean report back. Isn't that something? So While that's sinking in, I'm going to explain what Wave is, the Wave extension. And many web professionals may have heard this term thrown around or maybe even used it, right? But it is a extension that can be installed on most browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, etc. It is 100% free, and it performs a pretty reasonable and thorough automated accessibility scan, one page at a time. So it is a great extension to have installed on your browser, and to basically be able to, anytime at a moment's notice, output a quick automated accessibility report of whatever web page you're looking at. This could be your web page, your clients, one of your clients' competitors, for instance, if you're doing like a cross-sectional study and proposing, pro cons of becoming accessible. You could say, hey, look, all of your competitors are not accessible. If you were accessible, that would be a differentiator, right? The other one that is quite similar to Wave in many respects is Axe Dev Tools. It's the same kind of thing. It will scan one page at a time. It can be installed on most browsers. And the only difference being that, there's interface differences and maybe some differences in what it scans for. But the other marked difference is that it has a free version with a pro upgrade that adds on more features. And Axe, by the way, is put out by DEQUE, which is a widely respected accessibility firm that specializes in digital accessibility. The next set of tools, and arguably one of your most powerful accessibility testing tools, is a thing that you use every day already. It's your keyboard. So you should be able to use any website ideally with just a keyboard and no mouse. So if you haven't done this before, I'd highly recommend trying it. It can be very educational and eye-opening. Just go to your own website, or if you want to see an example of really good keyboard navigation, go to something like whitehouse.gov or equalizedigital.com, because we obviously put a lot of work into that and into accessibility on our own website. But just go there and start hitting the tab key on your keyboard. And what you should see is a little box come up that highlights different interactable elements, first in the navigation menu and then working your way down the page. You can use spacebar or enter to interact with links and buttons, and you can sometimes use arrow keys to navigate within certain elements depending on how well it's been set up. But just try it. Just try going to your website or to any website really and start messing around on a keyboard if you've never done it before. I promise you'll learn something just by trying it out. This is how people who don't use a mouse are interacting with the web every single day. Next are screen readers. So if you're unfamiliar, screen readers are essentially tools that read the interface and the content to a user, typically who is blind or low vision. If you're going for a comprehensive approach to accessibility in whatever you're going to be offering your customers, testing with a screen reader is going to be essential. The most common two are NVDA for Windows, which is a free and open source screen reader that you can install on a Windows machine. And then VoiceOver is the screen reader that's in Apple's iOS-based systems, and it's just bundled with the operating system. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is more of a tactic than an actual tool, although the tactic itself involves tools, if that makes sense, is the idea of shifting left with accessibility. So if you think about, like, say you're a website developer or website design agency working in WordPress, and you are using like any sort of project model, whether it's Agile or Waterfall, but you're moving through, a typical set of steps or phases where it's, discovery, content, design, development, testing, etc. When you're doing that process, it is incredibly important, if you're shifting left, right, to not save all of the accessibility analysis for the very end, right? What you end up with when you do that is a ginormous list of problems. Everyone's frustrated and everyone's, shouting to the heavens, if only I'd known sooner, right? What is significantly better to do is to have strategically placed considerations or checks for accessibility in discovery, in the content phase, in design phase. So, like, for example, in the content phase, we can be looking for things like ambiguous links. So making sure that the content that's being submitted for the website doesn't have like linked text that says just click here or learn more, which can be really confusing for a screen reader user, and that headings are being used in the proper order. If you're using a document that's using, or a content submission system that uses heading markup inside of it. In the design phase, you might be looking at specific interface considerations. So like color contrast, right? That's a big one that a lot of us have heard about. Having good fonts that are easily legible at various zoom points. Thinking about responsive design. So what is this design going to look like when it's super zoomed in or on a mobile device? A lot of us are accustomed to some of these considerations already. And then also thinking about how things like modals are going to be treated, or web forms, and making sure that we are mocking up things like the focus states on links and buttons, right, for if someone's navigating with a keyboard. All of these are sorts of things that you can consider in design. And then when you get to development, I mean, I'm not personally a developer, but I know that our development team uses code linters, uses automated checks directly inside of their code editing tools to scrub and check for and output errors related to accessibility problems. So again, there's a lot of little things that you can introduce to your process at various phases of the project that will let you deliver ultimately a more accessible result without having to take up a bunch of your team's time on an ongoing basis after that initial learning curve of introducing the new process, right? And as I think I mentioned earlier on this slide, we do have a shift left for accessibility checklist that I can share. Anyone who wants that, you can just email me, chris@equalizedigital.com. I will send you a copy of that. And it is the same checklist that we use in our own projects. So the final piece of the puzzle here in terms of tools and tactics are audits and user testing. Audits are almost always a comprehensive analysis against the web content accessibility guidelines. We haven't gone into this super in depth yet. We know that those are a standard, but suffice to say, web content accessibility guidelines has different versions. So there's 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, right? And there's different levels. So the lowest baseline level is A, and then there's AA, which most organizations strive for. And then there's AAA, which is kind of, in a sense, above and beyond. We could get into a philosophical discussion about that, but that's probably more appropriate for a different style of conversation. For most organizations, I think AAA can be considered a very high level of achievement. And then user testing is the other one. So that is always conducted with users with disabilities. And this can vary, but I think the easiest way to think about it, if you're new to this, is it's a little bit like a focus group. So they're testing different user journeys. Usually you're giving them a list of tasks to try and perform without explicitly telling them how to do the thing you want them to do. And then you see what trips them up. You get their general feedback about the interface. And user testing can be done with all sorts of different users, right? They don't just have to be blind or low vision. They don't just have to be deaf. They could be, we could be having users with cognitive impairments coming in, or we could be having veterans with PTSD coming in to test a website. There are a lot of different considerations, and usually it's audience specific, and it is customer specific what we're testing for, right? But I would say at a fundamental level, usually what we're doing is we're having blind users come in and test with their screen reader to make sure that the interface is being read back to them in an appropriate way that they don't find confusing for user testing. I want to talk a little bit about a tool that Equalize Digital has built to try and make some of this easier and try to make the barriers a little lower for organizations to start to identify and directly address accessibility problems on their WordPress website. So I'd like to introduce the attendees today and anyone watching the recording to Equalize Digital Accessibility Checker. This is a WordPress plugin that anyone can go and install on their WordPress website. There is a free version, and there's a pro upgrade to the tool that has more features. On my slide here, you can see a screenshot mocked up on a laptop of the Equalized Digital Accessibility Checker's individual page and post report interface. And on that, you can see that it is outputting errors, warnings, as well as a percentage pass test score and a reading level. And there are numerous things that you can drill down into in terms of reports and everything else. There are no limits to the quantity of pages and posts you can scan with this tool. We also have front-end issue highlighting for low-code or no-code users. And we have extensive documentation explaining what the problem is that you're currently trying to solve, why it's a problem, and how to fix it with WordPress-specific use cases with screenshots. So we really try to be thorough. We really try to turn this into a teaching tool that helps you deliver more accessible outcomes. We have WordPress specific checks, many of them built into the over 40 different automated tests that we run with this software, which makes it more accurate than the platform agnostic tools are going to be in a lot of respects, because we are checking for WordPress specific code and plugins in order to output certain errors and warnings, which these other tools like the browser extensions, et cetera, they just won't do. And findings, most importantly, are right inside the editor, the page and post editor in WordPress. So that's right where you are. That's right where your team is. That's right where your client is. So this is going to be front and center, and they're going to be able to see what the accessibility problems are. So say you go update a post and you forget, you put a new image into it, a new image in the post, and you forget to put alternative text, and that's an image that needs it. Accessibility checker warning count's going to go up, and you're going to see it, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I forgot to put alternative text on the image. Let me go do that, right? And that's really the idea. It's a way to keep websites accessible if they already are, and it's also a way to make existing websites more accessible up to the limitations of automated testing tools that I've mentioned before, right? It's a great starting point, and it's right inside WordPress. You can start for free today. The pro version allows you to scan in bulk, and every time you save a page or post, it will also scan automatically. Powerful site-wide open issues reports and more are available in the pro version. This tool is being used on the new NASA website, which was built on WordPress, and we were invested in by the founders of Yoast SEO. So I think we have some pretty strong backing that this is a reliable tool. You can definitely go and check it out, and you can go get the free version by searching for Accessibility Checker inside the WordPress plugin repository, or just install it directly from inside your WordPress dashboard. All right, to close us out here, I want to leave a little time for questions as if I can, but I want to talk a little bit about accessibility toolbars or widgets, which I think a lot of us have seen these, right? But essentially what these are in broad terminology, technologies that aim to improve the accessibility of a website purely through automation. So we're no longer talking about detection. We're talking about through software trying to just automatically fix problems. They apply third-party code, typically JavaScript, in an attempt to make improvements to the front-end code of a website. So the website is scraped, it's offloaded to the overlay or accessibility toolbar company's server. They run a bunch of stuff on it, and then it's fed back with JavaScript trying to fix issues in the code. And you're paying usually some sort of subscription. Usually it's $500+ a year. They usually also, as I've mocked up here, add some sort of floating toolbar or widget designed to help manipulate the interface of the website for end users in the bottom corner of the browser. Usually it has like a little person on it, right, with outstretched arms, which is kind of the universally accepted accessibility symbol. Many of these solutions, if you go look at their websites, promise, quote, full compliance with laws and standards. The thing that I really want to convey is that claim is, in just one word, deceptive. So here's what I think every web professional and freelancer should know about these tools before they decide to use one. Based on independent tests, this is number one, they reliably provide automated repair for, at best, 20 to 30% coverage of web content accessibility guidelines criteria. That is a best case scenario, and it could be argued that it's lower. Their toolbar functions, which, if you click on one of these widgets, usually you'll see the ability to like zoom in or out, or try to change the website to dark mode, or turn on their version of a screen reader, right? Or there's all sorts of different things. But essentially, what those functions do are fundamentally redundant, because if you take a second to stop and think, any individual who needs the ability to have their browser zoomed in to a certain degree, or have their website read to them by a screen reader, or modifying text size on pages, they're going to already have tools in their operating system or in their browser that are already doing that for them. And so what these overlays typically do is they can sometimes cause conflicts with those tools that they are used to using and make them no longer work. That's kind of a worst case scenario. Or they just get in the way, and they don't want to use them because they want to use their own tools that they've already installed and already on their personal device, right? And then beyond that, the automated repairs that they do, particularly for alternative text, web forms, navigation menus, have been shown to be unreliable, and also can slow down websites. Because if you think about it, your website's content is being offloaded to another server and then being fed back to the end user with a bunch of JavaScript layered on top of it in an attempt to automatically fix a bunch of accessibility problems. It can really slow things down. It can reduce your overall performance because there's an additional delay for loading all of that in and doing all of that activity. And I think this is kind of the cherry on top here, but many overlay companies themselves are now offering manual accessibility auditing and remediation plans, accessibility as a service plans, proving that their own tools don't actually address the problem. Even though many of their websites still say full compliance, if you take a second and look, they have all these services about making your website accessible manually. Now, I wonder why. Maybe it's because their tools don't actually do what they say, right? And overlays are really at most a temporary stopgap, going back to that at best 20 to 30% coverage of web content accessibility guidelines. They have a lot of slick sales language and videos and everything else trying to convince you otherwise. But the professionals in the accessibility world have looked at this. Users with disabilities have looked at these solutions, and the resounding and overwhelming feedback is that they are at best a temporary band-aid while you work on real accessibility fixes. So if you leave this webinar knowing just one thing, I want it to be this: there is no magic wand for real accessibility. We have to do the work, and we can make money doing it. I want, before our next session, which is going to be in a few weeks, I want everyone to think about ways that you could start to introduce an accessibility component into an existing offering, or think about what you'd ideally offer as a standalone introductory accessibility as a service offer. Based on what you want to roll out, I then want you to think about what approach you'd want to take in order to fulfill that offering. So maybe it's in-house or hybrid or outsourced. Again, it'll be offer dependent in terms of what you decide to do. But I think having some thought exercises around that, trying to map out a few things about what some ideal solutions might be, will ensure that you are ready and prepared for session 2. So what is the next session? The next session is understanding accessibility's place in the market. It is going to be Wednesday, April 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time US. Please mark your calendars. And we are going to be talking in great detail, diving much deeper into some of these fundamentals, like the legal landscape of accessibility. We're going to be talking a lot about specific laws and their implications. I'm not an attorney, but I'm going to share some high-level information. And then we are going to be talking about technology drivers and market drivers. How has the accessibility problem gotten to this point? Why are 96% plus of websites not accessible at a fundamental level? And how can we fix it, right? Then we're going to talk about high demand industries. So this is setting you up to start to look at your list of existing contacts, people that you could potentially get in touch with to start to have conversations about that initial accessibility offer that you're conceptualizing. And we're going to identify those good prospects together, give you some tools and tactics for doing that. And then we're going to talk about what the fundamental components are of constructing a good first initial accessibility as a service offer. So that is next session. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you for watching the recording, if you're here watching the recording, and especially thank you to Quickly Hire for hosting me. I forgot to mention this earlier in the presentation, but as you're thinking about this homework and thinking about whether you want to do hybrid or fully outsourced accessibility offerings, right? Maybe you need to augment your team. Please check out Quickly Hire. Please reach out to them. They may have just the professional you're looking for to help with this. And if you need more information about accessibility offerings or services, or you are looking for a accessibility specialist to partner on a couple projects, or you want more information about Accessibility Checker, please reach out to me, chris@equalizedigital.com. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening in and watching the whole presentation. There's so much really good information in there. If folks have questions, please go ahead and feed them into the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching, you can post a question, and we'll get to that. If you're watching the recording and have questions, make sure you come to our next session on April 17th and bring those questions with you, and we can answer those then. One thing that I really stuck with me, and having done a few different sessions with Chris's team, Chris and Amber over at Equalize Digital, is how easy it is to test accessibility, right? Yes, we can get very technical, but I loved the part where you talk about just using your keyboard and going through your website, your client's website, and finding accessibility issues that way. It can be as simple as that, and starting with that, because I know a lot of folks sometimes don't know where to start and how to do the testing and those sorts of things. And that's always something that comes up in these sessions on, how can we test? How can we do that? Just on a shoestring budget or those sorts of things. And I loved that part of it. I also want to, and I'll show this comment here from Laura on LinkedIn, who was watching, about the accessibility checker that you all offer at Equalize Digital. She has the free version, and says that there's so many resources inside that, and she's at a 95% accessibility rating because of it. So thank you for sharing
Round
that,
of
Laura.
applause
That's awesome.
for you, Laura. That's awesome. I love to see it. That's exactly why we built the tool and have a free version, was to try to democratize accessibility like WordPress democratized publishing. That's the whole objective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys are so ahead of the game on that too, because I'll just a little bit of behind the scenes looks, when Chris and I were talking about putting together the series, again and again, his primary objective is just bringing visibility and awareness to accessibility, and getting it out there and making sure folks have accessibility at the forefront of their design services and their development services. So that's really what he's working toward here, and it's all what they're doing at Equalize and getting this information out there. So thank you, Chris. You guys are really doing great work and being so generous with your knowledge and experience and everything you do.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And shout out to you and the Quickly Hire team as well. I've had the privilege of interacting with you and many other members of the team, and we are professionally connected with a few people who have joined your freelancer network. And I know that it is a great group of people to work with from firsthand experience. So can't thank you enough for hosting me for this, and for helping us spread the word about accessibility, because just my closing remark here is just going to be that we need help, and that's genuine. This is one of the largest problems on the internet today, and freelancers and agencies are the people with the tools and the know-how and the capability to address it. They just don't know it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved that tidbit also when you started with this. We're in a unique position here to really make a difference. And the folks who are watching today and the people in this audience, the agency owners out there, have the opportunity to do some really powerful stuff. So thank you everybody for joining today, for watching live, for watching the recording, if you're watching the recording. A reminder that we will be back with Chris on April 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already subscribed, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel so you have that or follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. So you'll see those and you'll get the alerts and the reminders for all of that. So make sure to do that. And I'll be sending emails out for that as well and getting those scheduled out. Apart from that, you can reach out to Chris at chris@equalizedigital.com. And one of the things you mentioned in the presentation was the shift left checklist. I really like that. I'm sure a lot of folks would find great value in that, just having a checklist of things you can go through. So feel free to reach out to Chris for that checklist that he generously offered. So chris@equalizedigital.com, and do the homework. Do you want to remind folks what the homework was, Chris?
Yeah, one more time. It is to spend some time thinking about what you might want an introductory accessibility offering to be, whether you're rolling that into an existing service you already offer, like maybe a maintenance plan or a care plan, or if you're going to create a new standalone offer, and then decide or conceptualize whether you might want that to be serviced in-house, hybrid, or outsourced. And that will prepare you adequately for our next session, where we dive more into constructing a full offer and what the context around constructing these offers really is in terms of market and legal drivers.
Awesome. I really look forward to that. And if you're an agency that's already offering accessibility services, please join in as well. Start, get the conversation going, ask your questions, share your experience and knowledge in the comments as well. It's a great conversation. And for a lot of folks not knowing where to start, your experience is helpful as well. So please don't think that just because you're already offering accessibility services, you can't contribute to this conversation as well. We'd love to have you here, and we really appreciate all of that being shared as well. For folks that are watching on YouTube, I did discover that we do not have the auto-generated captions for live streaming yet. It's not a feature that's live on our account. However, if you watch on LinkedIn, the auto-generated captions on live streaming are working, and they were a little kind of working on Facebook, but not as well. So LinkedIn for sure, they're working. Facebook was a little iffy, and YouTube, they will be available on the recording. So thank you everyone for joining in, and stay tuned for the announcement for the April 17th, and make sure you mark your calendars, and we'll see everybody there. So thank you, Chris. Have a great afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Emily.
Bye.